Okay.
I tend to root for the home team, and it was, of course, I lived in Edmonton during the Gretzky years, so it was really easy to root for the home team. And
I lived in Calgary during the Gretzky years, so I should be in anybody but Edmonton.
yeah,
But I'm always surprised on a spiritual note that people who are avowed atheists also believe that somehow the Vancouver Canucks are going to win the Stanley Cup. So
I believe that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win the Stanley Cup. What does that tell you about me?
You must be a man of faith. The work I've been doing in the last year since being released from prison after 30 years involves helping Canadians to understand the value of their own justice system, the value of their own correctional system. Why should people get out of prison? Why should we treat people relatively normal while they're inside of prison? I've been talking to university students and people in business. It's been an interesting adventure. And Howard agreed to join us this morning very graciously. Thank you for being with us, Howard.
It's a pleasure, Iridian. Nice to speak to you.
Absolutely. So, Howard, I won't tell you what Howard's background is. For those who know, I won't have to explain it. But he's an important Canadian, and he's played an important role over the years. I'll kind of let him explain himself and speak about his own journey. And I'm going to take him back to a place. I asked him if he would think about one of the formative moments in his life, early grade school, and how that impacted him and his journey forward.
Yeah, you challenged me to think about that, and I have been. And you know, it was really hard to pinpoint a moment. So, but there's certainly some things that happened that came flooding back to my mind when I was trying to come up with a good one to share with you. And it's more like the themes about forgiveness, for example, that my parents taught me. Things about, although they didn't call it and I didn't know it, but things about social justice, that some things in life aren't fair, but some of those things can be fixed, was sort of their attitude. So as a very young person, I saw how my parents modeled that. And, I don't come from a family with a lot of wealth. So they modeled it in sort of small human kindnesses with neighbors and in our community. So those are kinds of the things that I remember. I think they're very formative. If there was one that I put on the wall, my mother took me to my first protest march when I was about 12 or 13 years old, for the right of return of Russian Jews to Israel, because Russia wasn't offering travel visas at that time to Jews. So anyway, just that was maybe set a tone as well.
Very different life, you and I. When I was 13 years old, I was thinking that I wanted to be David Lee Roth and be hot for the teacher, and MTV was a big thing. I think I was protesting that my parents weren't willing to buy us cable vision that month.
Oh, I think I did some of that too. I don't want to paint either myself or my parents as in an idyllic way, but it was certainly those things were formative. Yeah.
So if you haven't guessed yet who Howard Sapers is, I'm still not going to tell you, but I'm going to do it by deduction. He said social justice was an important piece for him. He is not a member of the clergy. He is not a member of a recognized political party at this moment. And he's probably not out in the streets with a protest sign as we speak. Let me ask you another question, though, because this will kind of steer our readership, our viewership into an area that you know a lot about, and that is democracy. And so as a person who has benefited from democracy your whole life, what do you think some of the blind spots are in democracy?
Wow, that's a big question, and you didn't warn me about that one.
No, my mistake. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Blind spots in our democracy, and Well, there's a difference between democracy and mob rule. And so what's happened a lot in the administration of justice throughout my career is that loud, angry voices tend to get outsized attention,
Hmm.
and to the detriment of science.
Hmm.
I heard a quote the other day, an academic from the University of Alberta, whose name just for the moment escapes me. But what he said during a conversation was, tough on crime is anti-science,
Hmm.
right? Because we've got science that shows that it doesn't work. The more punitive you are doesn't necessarily mean the more safe you are. So I think that's a blind spot in the process, that if enough people yell loud enough, they get this attention, and you tend to then get governments, and it doesn't matter their political banner, you tend to get governments that react to that um, without really thinking too carefully. So we've had some pretty, I think, bad criminal justice policy as a result of that knee-jerk reaction to these loud voices, and that's a problem.
You're giving away all the hints when you use words like criminal justice. People are probably ascertaining that you have some legal training now in the background. We'll see if they can guess who you are on our next question. But before we go on, I'd just kind of like to explore that a little bit more. I've been doing some thinking about where we came from in our criminal justice system. We're a Commonwealth country, so we can really trace our roots of criminal justice back to the end of the Roman Empire, beginning of the British Empire. You start to take a look at Britain in the 17th century, and we go back to a place that everybody today knows as Speaker's Corner, but was also Hangman's Corner
Right.
in England at Tyburn. And for anybody who's ever watched Braveheart, they see William Wallace there being torn to pieces and eviscerated, and all kinds of other horrific things.
Yeah.
And I always think about that when I think about tough on crime, because, there's no such a thing as a little bit pregnant. Do we want to go back to that? Because that's a slippery road when you start going down that mob mentality. You were talking about outsized voices. I wonder if sometimes just the collective cacophony of uneducated or unschooled voices on tough on crime isn't also going to weigh into the future for Canada, especially after the next election. So I don't pose that as a question to you, but, any thoughts on that?
Well, sure. Access to justice, right? Access to justice, like what my mother taught me with that first protest. Access to justice. Access to justice requires knowledge. You have to know who to ask and what to look for and what to expect and what you have a right to, and what's proper and what's not proper. So all of that has got to do with access to justice, and that doesn't matter if you're a victim or an accused person or a bystander. Everybody needs to have that information and that knowledge, and that knowledge and that information also allows people to examine critically for themselves political responses, whether they make sense or they don't. So I think that knowledge, education is really important. I think that the more people understand about our criminal justice system, the greater the chances are they will make more thoughtful choices and decisions. But I want to add something, and it's a bumper sticker. Okay, I don't like bumper stickers very much in social policy discussions, but here's a bumper sticker that I think sums it up. Education is the answer only when ignorance is the problem. So what that means is that there are people for their own reasons, perhaps politicians for political reasons, who will cater to those loud, angry voices, right? Because it's going to get them votes, or at least it's going to get them a headline, which may get them votes. So that's not a matter of education. That's not a matter of knowledge. That's an ideology or an approach to public or political life. And if that approach is successful, then it gets reinforced that we can live in an anti-science environment because it works, and that's a danger in democracy as well.
I just think that For me, one of the blind sides in democracy is the actual process of democracy. After 30 years of incarceration, I come out of my bathroom, I step out of my time machine into a world where it's $3,000 for a month's rent, where a bag of peppers costs $7. And so the average fella, the average family is so busy just taking care of their essential needs that I don't think they have time they don't have time to go to law school. They don't have time to watch parliamentary debates. And yet they're required during a general election to cast their important vote for things that they just haven't had time to be educated on.
Yeah. But right. And so what was it? The democracy is the worst possible political process except for all the others. Was that Churchill or some version of that? And so, sure, people are franchised and they can vote, and your vote and my vote are equal, and they should be. I may vote for somebody that you won't vote for, and I'll vote for them because they said something stupid that appealed to me, and you'll not vote for them because they said the same stupid thing that didn't appeal to you. That's democracy. That's democracy. The best we can hope for is that it's not just based on, oh yeah, that guy just echoes everything I believe. Right now, we're being told that Canada is broken. There are people that believe that. I'm not one of them. But if you can find the right issues and you percuss those strings often enough, people are going to think you're just like them, and that gets you political support. That gets back to the ignorance is not always the problem issue. All we can expect from people really is that they will take the time to vote. On top of that, I have participated in the political process. I have run for office, and
you're giving away your secrets.
And on top of that, I would want people to at least take the time before they make their ballot choice, that if they have an issue, if they have a problem, that they talk to the candidates about that specific issue, and at least get educated about what those candidates are saying about that specific thing.
So there you have it. A guy who's run for office obviously has the lexicon of understanding law and policy in Canada, and has a social conscience that began when his parents introduced him to the concept of protest. So my guest today, Mr. Howard Sapers, was not a judge, but the former correctional investigator for Canada. Now, some of the phrases for a correctional investigator include ombudsman, watchdog, which is a more common phrase. And so Howard served as a watchdog for, I believe, a decade, if I have that right.
Well, 12 years.
12 years. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Who was counting? Well, oh, wait a second. I was counting. There's a bunch of marks on my wall in my cell. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And a pretty interesting guy. I read some of his writing, and it was obvious that he was not of that school that made decisions without enough knowledge. So as a watchdog for folks who have done horrendous things, human beings who've done horrendous things to Canadian citizens, how did you balance that inside yourself? You're a person who really cares about justice. You care about people. How did you balance that defense of the folks who had done horrific things?
See, I don't want to burst any bubbles, but I wasn't defending those individuals. I was defending the principles that hold us together. We started the conversation talking about democracy. Our democracy is based on the rule of law. We have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Charter doesn't say that somebody who broke the law in a way that you in particular don't like lose all their rights and freedoms. What the Charter says is people will only lose their rights that are necessarily removed because of something like a sentence to incarceration. You don't have the same mobility rights as you used to have, right? Or maybe the same association rights as you used to have, but you retain all the other rights, including due process or what the Charter actually talks about is natural justice. And so that means that you're entitled to all that fairness. And the principles that back that up are principles like using the least restrictive measure. And the way to think about that, and I don't need to tell you, but for people who are listening, have you ever asked yourself, why do we have minimum security and medium security and maximum security prisons? Well, it's because people pose different reintegration, different socialization risks. And only need maximum security when the risk is that high. So as the risk is lower, so can the conditions of confinement be ameliorated. And that's this legal principle about using the least intrusive or the least restrictive measure. And that applies to everybody. It applies to the way the police interact with citizens on the street. The police don't shoot out your tires when they stop you for speeding, at least most of the time, right? And when they do, it's a big deal. So we, it's not about protecting people who have been found guilty of horrific acts of violence. This is about making sure the system works it's supposed to. Somebody, it does go to prison. My hope is that when they leave prison, they'll be somehow better for that experience. That would have changed. And you can't hope for that kind of a positive change if that environment is corrupt or dangerous or fraught with mistreatment. So that's why I got out of bed every morning as correctional investigator. In fact, I would often correct people and they'd say, we want to introduce, Sapers. He's a well-known advocate for prisoners. No, I'm not. Hope to be a well-known advocate for fair treatment in the administration of justice according to these legal principles. And so when a prisoner would contact the office, it didn't matter really why they were in prison. When they contacted the office, what we wanted to figure out is the issue they presented to us, is it founded? Is it represent a violation of law or policy? Was it manifestly unfair? And if so, we'd intervene and make recommendations to fix it.
It's an interesting concept because the concept of human rights is that they apply to humans. And I guess that's the narrative that's out there right now, is that those who have committed the most inhuman acts, are they still humans? And I think that, that discussion has to be had, because I think there's a path forward in it. And I think if it breathes, if it walks and talks and quacks like a duck, it is a duck, right? So when humans phone you from the confines, you apply a standard of human rights to them.
Yeah, well said. This is going to be difficult for people to hear who have suffered, perhaps, as a result of some terrible crime. That the person who committed that act, in my experience, cannot be summed up by that act. And so the one thing I've learned, I've been hanging around people in conflict with the law for over 40 years now, and talked to a lot of men and women, and I've talked to a lot of the people on the receiving end of their behaviors as well. And the one thing that strikes me is that all of these people are sort of fully formed human beings, right? They have lives, they have families. Sometimes their families are just are awful, but they have families, they have circumstances, they have hopes, they have ambitions, they have remorse, they have shame, they have hope. So all of those things, and I think it's dangerous to just focus on perhaps the worst moment in somebody's life, particularly if you believe in the mission of modern corrections, which is to reintegrate people, rehabilitate people, to have them safely re-enter community life. If you believe that, I do, then those are the other things you need to focus on, perhaps even more so than what's called the index offense, the reason why they were sent to prison. Of course, that's important. Of course, we can't forget about that, and I'm not suggesting you should, but we have to look at all those other things as well.
So you mentioned that you're not a great defender of people's horrible actions. I can accept that. So here in Canada, what we do is we put people in a small room. I normally call it my bathroom because that's about how big it is. It's a small bathroom. And then we send them for long periods of time inside the bathroom to think about how to not live in the bathroom anymore, if that's ever going to happen. So I found an interesting analogy. A flight to Pluto and back is 19 years. I spent 30 years incarcerated, so I could have went to Pluto and back and been back to Pluto and on my way back to you here right now. And so let me ask you a question. Do you like music?
Sure.
Yeah. So if you had an instrument and you were on that flight, what instrument would you choose? And what kind of music, what kind of a song would you write that would be your song that would define your experience?
Oh, boy. So you asked me if I liked music, and I do. I should tell you that I've tried piano, guitar, and various percussion.
No piano in the bathroom, Howard.
Yeah, all without success, Iridian, all without success. I appreciate music. I would probably, if I really had a choice, is I'd bring with like the biggest capacity iPod I could find, so I could have a whole variety of music, because I have very eclectic tastes. I love listening to music. I love live performances. But I've never fancied myself a musician nor a poet. So I don't know what kind of song it would be. Probably a song about loneliness, I would imagine.
Well, let me tell you, I wasn't that lonely. And you don't want to be having an iPod in a Canadian prison nowadays. They're not permitted into the prison. And the way that these kind of devices come into a prison,
I thought I was on a flight to Pluto.
Yeah, the flight to Pluto. So on my flight to Pluto and return, my 30 years in the penitentiary, it's interesting you talked about technology, because Howard is going to be involved. He's going to be representing Canada with a panel of esteemed colleagues and Canadians talking about corrections in Singapore in September. We're looking forward to hearing your feedback from that. One of the things that's going to be discussed at that conference, one of your colleagues is a specialist in the role of technology and how it can play. It can really bring us some of the things that we're not getting from our correctional system right now in terms of education and access to socialization for prisoners. It'll be very interesting to hear how that turns out, Howard. Howard Sapers, Canada's former and formidable correctional investigator, sticking up for humans, no matter how unhuman they become for moments at a time. Thanks for your time today, Mr. Sapers, and we're looking forward to hearing from you again soon.
Really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for inviting me to it.
Thank you so much for continuing to follow my social media, and most importantly, for your input. So many people, when I began this journey, did not understand that in Canada, we don't send people to prison for criminal offenses. We send them back to the community through a very expensive and pretty effective correctional system. But more people need to be engaged in that conversation. More people need to ask questions and to make statements. And social media is the mechanism to do that. Thank you for being on this journey with me. It is a privilege to walk with you. And I'm looking forward to the things that we see directly ahead.